Hi, my name is Stephanie Spencer, and I'm a former cardiac RN turned plant-based educator, and I'm going to explain to you today why no oil when we talk about a whole food plant-based diet. So in a nutshell, no oil is crucial if your healthcare goal is to greatly improve or even reverse your chronic diseases such as high blood pressure, heart disease, high cholesterol, and especially type 2 diabetes. About 10.5% of the American population suffers from type 2 diabetes. About 13.6% of Arkansas's population has type 2 diabetes. And by the time we get to be age 65, about half the population has either pre-diabetes or diabetes. So it is running rampant in our society. And it's important to understand that there has been an explosion of research in our ability to combat chronic disease with nutrition in the last 20 years. And in fact, there's even been a physician specialty group that's formed around this basic premise that we can actually reverse chronic disease with lifestyle changes, primarily a plant predominant diet. And this group is called the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I'm a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and I'm actually going to link below here their website and a lot of the research that they have done that demonstrates the effectiveness of a plant-based diet in reversing these chronic diseases. So first of all, let's talk about type 2 diabetes, okay, and why a plant-based diet is so effective at greatly improving and even reversing type 2 diabetes. So first of all, we need to understand under normal conditions, how does our body metabolize blood sugar, okay? So after we eat a meal, whenever we eat, everything is going to be all our food is going to be turned into glucose, or basically sugar, by our stomach, by our GI tract, okay? So after we eat lunch, we've got all this glucose running through our bloodstream. This little red tablecloth here is going to represent our bloodstream. So we've got the sugar, here we go, running through our bloodstream, and here's our sugar. And this sieve is going to represent our muscle cells, okay? And so the sugar or the glucose has to make it from our bloodstream into the muscle cells, and it's got to go through this muscle cell wall. And that's what happens all day long, is that our blood sugar just waxes and wanes between our bloodstream and between the cells. And so the cells are going to soak up that glucose, and then we're going to use that for everything we need to do. That's the fuel that we run on. So this little spoon is actually going to represent insulin. Okay, so you're probably all familiar with insulin, or you've heard of it. But the purpose of insulin really is to just escort. The glucose requires an escort, in essence, to get from the bloodstream into the cells. And that is insulin. So after we eat our lunch, here's our sugar coming along, and the insulin is going to escort it up to these muscle cell walls, and it's going to go right from the bloodstream into the cell under normal circumstances. This is what happens all day long, and that's how we have the energy to do everything we need to do, okay? So then how is this process different in someone that has type 2 diabetes? In 2004, there was a new technology that was developed called MR spectroscopy. It's kind of like MRI, but this MR spectroscopy allowed us to look at the muscle cells of people. And so in type 2 diabetics, they were able to look at the muscle cells on a microscopic level, and what they found was that type 2 diabetics typically tended to have fat buildup on their muscle cell walls. And so that really furthered our understanding of the cause of insulin resistance, and I'm going to show you how. So imagine again, we're eating our lunch, and our stomach has turned our food into glucose, but we're starting to get this fat buildup on our muscle cell walls. The sugar is not going to be able to go into the muscle cell walls. The insulin can't drive it in because the insulin is being resisted by this layer of fat, okay? So therefore, insulin and blood sugar are just going to build up higher and higher in the bloodstream because they can't flow, they can't wax and wane between the bloodstream and the muscle cells anymore. So the owner of the bloodstream is going to start to not feel good because they have so much blood sugar building up. And when that happens, when we get higher levels of blood sugar, we get really thirsty, really hungry, start urinating a whole lot. You go to the doctor to find out what's wrong. They draw blood from you, and then your doctor is going to end up telling you that you're diabetic, which we don't want to hear, right? And so it's important to understand this is the definition of insulin resistance: fat buildup on the muscle cell walls. It resists the effect of insulin, which needs to transport the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. So high blood sugar isn't the cause of diabetes, it is the effect of insulin resistance. And so a doctor named Dr. Neil Bernard in 2006 did a study to find out if switching patients to a whole food, plant-based, no to minimal oil diet would be more effective than our typical way of treating diabetes. And this was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And what he found out was that patients on a whole food, plant-based, very low oil to no oil diet lowered their blood sugars 3 times more effectively than the typical American Diabetes Association diet, which is basically a low carb, no sugar diet. But if we switch to a diet of whole food plants, which is naturally low in fat, so we're talking whole grains, legumes, beans, peas, and lentils, fruits and vegetables, then we can drastically lower the fat content of our bloodstream. And watch this. We can actually melt that fat out of our muscle cell walls. And guess what? Then we can restore our insulin sensitivity. See, it works just like that. My husband said, do not pour this over the sink. That shouldn't go in your plumbing in your house. It would be best to stay out of the plumbing in your body. But yeah, so we can drastically lower the fat in the bloodstream. And our bloodstream, remember, it's just like a river. And it's washing over our artery walls and our muscle cell walls. And this river, if it's high in fat, it'll deposit fat. But if it's low in fat, it can wash away the fat that's clogged up on our artery walls and on our muscle cells. And so it can, in effect, just undo that insulin resistance. And as we open up that cell wall, that permeability again, and then the sugar and the insulin will just start to work again. The sugar will start to go in. We will undo insulin resistance by lowering the fat in our diet. But we have to not be eating oil with our plant-based diet if we're going to be effective at really making progress with type 2 diabetes. So how soon can this start to take effect? In one study, they found that subjects were able to decrease their insulin by 60% in just 16 days after they switched to a whole food plant-based diet without oil, which means you need to be under the care of a physician when you do this if you are type 2 diabetic, or especially if you have high blood pressure and taking blood pressure pills. Your conditions will improve so rapidly that your medicine will become too strong for you. And we don't want you to have a low blood sugar episode. We don't want you to fall over and hit your head. So these are good problems to have. You're just going to work with your doctor, and we're going to lower the pills in advance or get standing orders with your doctor so that you can stay ahead. And that's exactly what we want to do, is start backing off of these medications. That means you're getting better. And so it's important to know too now that a plant-based diet is now considered an acceptable diet for treating diabetes by the American Diabetic Association. And when we talk of whole food plant-based diet, it's not just salads and kale. I like to tell my people to think of beans and rice, think of chilies, think of like chickpea curry on top of rice. We have things like black bean brownies, smoothies for breakfast, oatmeal, hummus sandwiches, portobello burgers. There's just all sorts of exciting things. We've got the whole internet, and there's an infinite amount of resources and recipes out there. So it's really an exciting time, and a lot of restaurants are starting to get on board with this too. And so we have a lot more options than we did even 3 years ago. And we can also drastically improve our heart health by switching to a whole food plant-based diet. The kind of fat that is most inflammatory to our coronary arteries, the arteries that lay on top of our heart muscle, that's the arteries that have the heart attacks. The most inflammatory products are LDL cholesterol, that low density lipoprotein, like bad cholesterol. And that all comes from animal products. So that's meat, fish, fowl, dairy, butter, eggs, yogurt. All these things have cholesterol, and if we eliminate all animal products, we will eliminate dietary cholesterol from our diets. And what happens when we eat this cholesterol, it inflames the lining of the arteries on our heart. And it also, we get plaque buildup from the cholesterol. But when the lining gets worn away by inflammatory processes, then that plaque can break through the lining of our arteries and rupture. And that's what causes heart attacks. And heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the Western world. And so if we eliminate animal products and switch to eating all plants, all whole food plants, we have eliminated cholesterol and all that inflammation out of our diet. So then the lining of our arteries can start to heal. So also in studies on heart disease, in one study, patients that switched to a plant-based diet, their chronic chest pain resolved within just 3 weeks. And in another study, patients that had every single one of these patients had already had a heart attack. They switched to a strict whole food plant-based no oil diet with 6 servings of leafy greens a day, which are really good for our heart arteries. And that diet made these patients basically 99.6% heart attack proof. So this is a virtual cure for heart disease, which is the #1 cause of death in the Western world. You just eat plants, and you can absolutely do this.